name's Jenelle Riley. I'm an editor at Variety, and I am so thrilled to be here for this half hour with Hulu's Little Fires Everywhere. At this time, please join me in welcoming today's guests. We have creator executive producer Liz Tigelaar, executive producer Pilar Savone, executive producer Laura Neustadter, and author Celeste. Thank you all so much for being here. Before we get started, actually, we're going to take a look at a clip from the show. I think everyone's probably seen the show, but just in case, we'll give you a quick taste of the show. Let's look at a clip.
And she really doesn't leave a baby alone in the cold in front of a fire station.
You didn't make good choices. You had good choices. Options that being rich and white and entitled gave you.
Again, that's the difference between you and me. I would never make this about race.
Elena, you made this about race when you stood out there in the street and begged me to be your maid.
This is not working. I think this is going to be your last day.
You think?
Is this all just a plan with you and Bibi to worm your way into our lives to get to Mirabel? Why did you even take this job?
I took this job to protect my kid.
From what?
From you.
I thought we were friends.
White women always want to be friends with their maid. I was not your maid, Elena, and I was never your friend.
Sorry, even with a clip, I just get into it. I'm sorry. I want to start at the beginning with Celeste. Little Fires Everywhere was your second novel, published in 2017. I know, all stories are a little autobiographical. I know you grew up in Shaker Heights, Ohio, but what prompted you to want to tell this story? Was it the characters? Was it the story itself? Where did it all begin?
It really came out of wanting to write about Shaker Heights. It's a place that I love deeply, that shaped me into the person I am, but that also confuses me. It's a little bit like a relative where you love them and yet you can see their faults and their blind spots. And so I started writing about Shaker Heights, thinking, what if Shaker Heights was a family? What would that family look like? And what kind of family might stir up trouble for them, because that's what authors always do. And that's how I came to the Richardson family, and particularly Elena Richardson as played by Reese. And then Mia Warren and Pearl, her daughter, is played by Kerry Washington. It kind of came from there. Once you've got those components, the story just moves.
And Liz, you were the one who developed the limited series. How did the story find its way to you, and what made you see it as cinematic, specifically a series?
Well, I was not the initiator of that. Lauren was, actually, so she's probably a better one to ask. Lauren and Pilar made their way to me, but it was really Lauren's passion for this project from the very beginning that inspired what all of this became. Lauren, I'm throwing it to you.
I will say, I don't know if there's anything in my life I felt more sure of than when I read this unpublished manuscript. I got a galley of it from Celeste's agent, and I had not even been working with Reese for a month. And I remember sitting in my bed and just ripping through that book and being so stunned by how magnificent the storytelling was and how invested I was in these characters and how I made assumptions at the beginning that were completely upended by the end. And I remember I just said to Reese, you have to read this right away. And we all fell in love with it. And then the dream was to bring it to Kerry and to invite Kerry and Pilar to join us in producing and to have Kerry star alongside Reese. And then we had the privilege of working with Liz on the morning show. And I had just fallen in love with her and her writing. And I had a feeling that she would be perfect for this. So we approached her, and it all felt like fate, to be honest, a real dream come true.
Lauren, when you took it to Reese, were you thinking for her as a producer or as an actor or both?
Either.
Yeah.
I just felt that she would love this story. And that it was one that we should be telling. We had been having big conversations about what we wanted Hello Sunshine to be and what kinds of stories we wanted to tell. And I almost felt like I was nervous to be so strong in declaring, because I was like, oh gosh, is it too soon to say that I love something this much? And it turned out that, Reese and Celeste knew each other. Reese was already a fan of her work, and they had actually spoken about this novel. So it wasn't news to her, and she dove right in typical Reese fashion. She devoured it and said, we have to do this, and I would love to be Elena.
And Pilar, you run Sampson Street with Kerry Washington. Same question. When it was brought to her, was it always as a producer-actor combo, or was it originally just, as one?
No, it was. I mean, Lauren, they came to us. I think Reese actually texted Carrie on a Friday and said, read this over the weekend. And I would love to do this with you as an actress and as a producer. So we read it with that in mind, having Carrie play Mia and us producing as well.
I mean, when you see it, it's obvious what the attraction was, but what was the attraction for you and Carrie in the beginning?
Carrie was just immediately drawn to this character, and I think we all found different elements of this book that we responded to. At the time, I was not a mom, so I was really drawn to the kids and their stories. I think Carrie just fell in love with Mia. She fell in love with that character. And I think working with Lauren and working with Reese and being able to adapt one of Celeste's novels was just super exciting to us as a company. So I think we read it, we devoured it, we loved it just like they did. And then once we really started digging in with each other and really starting to develop it and produce it together, it really just kind of became a dream team amongst all of us.
Okay, now let's go back to Liz and let me ask you, what was your interest and attraction in the story?
Oh, I mean, well, Lauren called and she was like, I'm sending you a book, I think she was like, you have 24 hours to read it. And then she said, and if you love it, I'll, put you before everybody to see if, if they love you or they want to do it with you. And so anyway, I read it, and I mean, again, it does feel like so long ago now, but I just remember at the time, there were so many connectivity points for me of being at the time, I felt like I was a pretty recent new mom. I'm an adopted kid. I always imagined myself a Mia. As a teenager, I was an Izzy. But I definitely have grown up to be probably a lot closer to Elena. And there were just a lot of ways that I related. But I think more than anything, it was like, when I read the book, I just felt, as a writer, you're always looking for those things you connect to. And I felt like I had been honestly waiting my whole career for this. Like, I felt like, oh, this is what I've been working so hard for. Like, this is what I've been getting ready for all this time, for this to have been so generously given to me, and then hopefully to be ready to meet the challenge of it. I mean, obviously I was super scared because it was Reese and Carrie, and I was like, oh no, like, what if I screw it all up? It's like you have the panic that stops you from taking on things like this. But I was like, I think this is going to be epic.
So interesting to me that you were an Izzy. I was a total Moody. So
oh, we love Moody.
I love Moody. But like when when Trip will say something awful and Moody will just respond, and then Elena's like, Moody, stop bothering your brother. I was like, oh, those little microaggressions I so relate to.
Yeah, those dynamics were really fun. All the real specifics with the kids and how each of them were parented so differently. And I think just by the ages we all are, and it being a 90s show, it was really fun to go back.
I mean, in terms of books being adapted, things kind of happen relatively quick for you, Celeste. I don't know if, this was your first experience with this, so if you thought this is how it always went, or if this
I've been
by surprise.
I've been saying that I think that this this production just set the bar so high. It sort of worked out as this beautiful dream that everything went the way that a writer imagines it to go, and her best possible thing, her best possible imagination of it. It came out to be sort of a charmed thing, but I think it was because everyone who was working on this, literally every single person I met when I visited set, when I visited the writer's room, had this deep connection to the book and felt a personal connection to it and brought that in. And I think you can see that on the screen, that people say, you know, oh, I was an Izzy, or, you know, I wanted to be Pearl, but I really was more like Moody, you know, that there was this sort of deep connection. And I think that shows in every frame that's on the screen.
Mhm. And in addition to Reese and Carrie, you were blessed with an amazing cast. I mean, having read the book, you know, I was like, where are they going to find these actors to play these kids? Because they really have to carry the story for a lot of the way. And I am just so impressed with the casting. I would love to know about the process. If it was all through a casting director, what was the most challenging role to cast?
Well, we have to give a big, humongous shout out to David Rubin. He is just the most unbelievable casting director, and he crushed this. You know, I think after Big Little Lies and Wild, you know, Reese knew him very well, and we just knew that casting those teenagers, in truth, I mean, every role is incredibly important, but it was the combination of the teenagers and then Mia and Elena in flashback. And I would say that Mia in flashback probably was our most challenging. And then Tiffany Boone
Oof.
It was uncanny.
I mean, and Anna Sophia, the two of them, that we always were like, if there's going to be another season, it should be them. It should be like the young versions of, and it is a limited series. We're good, but I mean, they were tremendous.
They were incredible.
Yeah.
I will never forget the first day that Tiffany Boone was working. It was the scene with her on the telephone, and I looked. She did a take, and I looked to Carrie's hairdresser, and I said, "What just happened?" Like, we were all we were just blown away with her performance.
The writers were working on that particular episode. And as a fiction writer, you have the luxury of being able to move through time, of being able to move however you want, of you can flash back for a second. And I was thinking, how are they going to bring this to the screen? You know, how are they going to find people? And I should have had faith, because I think those two actresses really could not have channeled Carrie and Reese and those characters any better.
They're so good. There was a moment that I didn't realize they were different actors. And you cast as Jamie, an actor I love, Luke Bracey, and he plays both the young and the old Jamie. And I actually thought it was two different actors for a split second, because he's so good.
If we're in the casting realm, I think that is something also that David gets great credit for. He smartly said, we have to have actors that bridge the worlds. We have to have a couple of individuals, Luke being one of them, where you don't have a different actor in the different time periods, but where they can play the full range. And so that was part of the criteria in casting Jamie, and Luke did a magnificent job, but he really did, he transformed himself. It was great. And hair and makeup and VFX, shout outs to everyone.
Obviously, when you're adapting a story for a different medium, there are going to be changes made. Otherwise, I don't think you should make it, because no one wants to see a verbatim adaptation. Can you talk about some of the more significant changes? And Celeste, if you were involved in those decisions, how you felt about it? I guess we can start with who set the fire, because that's a huge change, and it really worked in the show.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because it was one of the things that I remember Liz coming to me pretty early on and saying, okay, we're thinking about making this change. How do you feel? And the way I remember it, and Liz, I hope you remember the same way, was that I said, what happens in the book is what happens in the book. And I have always said that I wanted the TV show to be an adaptation, exactly like you said. I didn't want it to be a beat for beat copy of what was in the novel. I wanted it to have space to be its own thing. And so when you said, Liz, that you were thinking we might make some changes, I was actually really excited. And I actually didn't know until I think I got the screeners what you had decided on. I knew of a couple options, but I wasn't sure. And so I got the joy of coming to it, as the author, and yet not knowing what was going to happen. It was something that I was thrilled to see you take the reins on, and I think couldn't have been done in a better way.
I mean, that makes me so happy, because definitely in the beginning, when we first took it out as a pitch, that was something that I felt we talked a lot about like giving the audience something unexpected, but something that felt earned and still honoring the spirit of the book. And so to me, it was there was always something about like, I look at like Into the Woods where they're like, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. Well, if you hadn't done this, you hadn't done this. And I always thought about that in this moment where ultimately the person who you want to take the most responsibility for the fire is Elena. And how do you get her to that point? And how in some ways do you get to see that this fire didn't just start by one person, this fire built, and this was sparked by so many things. And so anyway, I loved where it ended up. I will say it's probably the thing I lost sleep over the most. It was probably the hardest episode of television I've ever broken in all my years. I think everyone in the room would say the same thing. We spent the whole season asking ourselves, can we earn this? And everything we did, especially with Moody, Trip, and Lexi over the course of the season, was to get to that point in terms of their stories. And so it probably was the thing that scared me the most and was the most satisfying. And every time I see it, I'm like, I mean, I will say in the first read through we did of the finale, I sobbed the entire second half of the script. And I was literally like wiping my face with the script. And I'm like, this is embarrassing. I cannot stop crying. And it was honestly, it felt like how I felt like when I had a baby and I knew my baby was okay. Like I was so relieved. I was like, it's working. I'm so happy. I think it's working. And it just, and then obviously Lynn brought it to life, and yeah, it all came together.
I remember that table read, by the way. We did it on a sound stage, and we did it over a lunch so that everybody could be there. There's a great picture if you search our socials. It's like everyone, just this mass of all of us back in the days when we could all stand really, really close to each other. But I remember the feeling in that room too, that we all sort of, we felt, as Celeste said, everybody came together because we loved this book. And so we had to do this right. And I remember the feeling of, we did this right. I hope, it feels like I hope we did this right, but it was really, I remember how very emotional that day was.
One other thing I want to talk about is the casting of Kerry Washington. I don't believe Mia's race is specified in the book,
yeah.
but obviously when you cast Kerry Washington, who's an icon, but also a Black woman, how did that sort of affect the writing or change the story? Beyond the obvious.
Yeah, I knew actually when Lauren and Reese came to me and said, okay, we have an idea for casting and we're thinking of casting Kerry Washington. I had already pretty much made up my mind that they were the right people, but that was a moment where I knew they were absolutely the right people to bring this to the screen. Because when I wrote Mia as a character, I initially thought I wanted to make her a woman of color, but I ran into a problem because I knew that this story was going to involve the adoption of a Chinese American baby. And if Mia was a Chinese American or even an Asian American woman, that was something I knew I could write, but it seemed like it made her loyalties to Bibi and to her baby too easy. But I didn't feel that I was the right person to try and bring a Black woman's experience to the screen or a Latina woman's experience to the screen, because I know that there are things that I don't know, and I wanted to make sure I could get it right. And it would have been so easy to get things wrong. And so I wrote Mia thinking of her as a working class white woman. But when Lauren and Reese came and said, we think Kerry can bring this dimension in, it meant to me that they were leaning into all these complicated questions of race and class that, again, it would have been really easy to shy away from. And so I was thrilled to hear about that. And I was thrilled that it means the series gets to explore those questions in ways that the book didn't get to.
Yeah. I would say that probably is out of all the changes, that was a change and a deepening that I think informed the heartbeat of the series so significantly. And everything I'm not saying everything changed off that, but we had to examine every interaction differently, knowing that at the core, it was this relationship between a white woman and a Black woman in a very different power dynamics, and that were always shifting. And so I think that was the most significant change. where certain plot moments could stay the same, the weight of Elena asking Mia to work in her home, the weight of what it meant for Lexi to show up at Mia's house after getting an abortion that she kind of pawned off on Mia's daughter. It all represented a different weight. And then certainly exploring Mia as a bisexual woman of color, all those things, also who she was in her own religious family. I mean, all of these things deep into the conversation. But I think that that key line that's kind of become the anthem of the series, that idea of you didn't make good choices, you had good choices. We wouldn't have found that line written by Attica Locke. We wouldn't have found that if not for Carrie's casting. And obviously all Carrie brought to this too, because so much of what was infused in Mia obviously started in the book, percolated in the writer's room and grew from there, but really came through Carrie and her own experience. And so anyway, it was extremely powerful. And then I think to have the show come out at a time in our country where finally a lot of these things were thrust into, for better or worse, the forefront of conversation, I think it made it all the more timely.
I think you did an amazing job in terms of building a room that brought so many different points of view to this story, that everyone had the book in common, but no one came to it in exactly the same way. And it was, I mean, just in terms of the individuals, the strength of the writing, the culture of the room. I mean, it's the most unbelievable room you could ever imagine. But I do think the tremendous writing of the series, obviously so many kudos to Liz, but that was a dream writer's room as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the show would not have been what it was without every single one of those writers and every single person's perspective. And I think that, you know, as Celeste said, I also didn't have the life experience. I was not the person to tell that story, but getting to tell it with 7 other people, I think collectively we were able to become a team who could.
I would love to sort of know how the writer's room worked. Did you break the whole story together and then everyone went off to write a specific episode? And, you know, did you have any rules to keep it in one cohesive voice?
Well, I wrote the pilot, and certainly the writers all, once they came into the room, read the pilot and then gave feedback on the pilot. I will say we spent the entire season debating who started the fire, and wondering if we could earn it. And then we just go in order. You usually go in order in terms of writing of seniority. And so you start with kind of the co-EPs. And one thing that was really important to me was to have a co-EP team that represented the racial landscape of the show, that the people who had the most experience and the highest voices in the room. I mean, this room was a very level playing field between all of us. There really was not a hierarchy. Everyone was equally as talented, even if some people had more experience than others. But yeah, that we were really able to reflect the story in kind of the upper level decision making in the room. And then we just go episode by episode. And, you know, when you break the story, that's putting it together. And you do that as a group. And, you know, this was a room that wasn't afraid to be honest, I think to be vulnerable, to kick the tires on everything, to not settle, to say what they thought when they thought it. And that was what made the story so great. And I think it's, you know, I think so much of a room, especially dealing with the, you know, I've been on a lot of shows that have been about certain subject matter. The subject matter we were dealing with on this show, it was subject matter that feels vital to us as people. We're talking about motherhood, we're talking about race, we're talking about inequities, we're talking about socioeconomic status, you know, so many things. And I think that there had to be a certain level of vulnerability and safety for people to be able to really tell their stories. And so that's the vibe you try to create. And when you create that, it ends up inevitably being a really fun vibe too.
Pilar, I'm curious because you really began your producing career in films. You're an Academy Award nominee for Django Unchained. What do you like about the medium of television? Is it significantly different from working in film?
It is different because in film, I feel like, how did I explain it when we were on set? It's, in film, you have this real beginning, middle, and end, right? It's this smaller 2 hours. You kind of know exactly where it's going to go. This is obviously much more spread out. The dynamic is different between the writer and the director. It's totally different, but it's also extremely fun and exciting. And, I prefer actually doing TV right now, in the world that we're living in. I still love features. It'll always be where my heart lies. But kind of breaking these longer stories and beginning to go to take it further is fun.
This series leaves a lot of opportunity for story at the end. Has there been discussion of a second season? I'm asking as both a professional and a fan.
I will say, as the book's author, that probably the question that I get asked most often is, but what happens next? Are you going to write a sequel? So from my point, everything that I know about the characters is sort of on the page. I'm not holding out on anyone, and I don't secretly know where everyone is at the end and how they come together. For right now, I think that what Liz and Reese and Carrie and all of the actors have put on the screen, I feel like hopefully tells you enough of the story that you can take that seed and imagine what goes further, so that if there's never a continuation of this, you have those characters in your mind and they're still alive for you and you can still imagine where they're going to go.
Okay, but that's not a no.
I would say if Celeste writes another book, I will happily adapt it.
I was going to say, if we get a sequel of the novel, obviously we'll come back to you, Jenelle, and have a different conversation. I would say the house burned down, it was a reckoning, and I think a really hopeful ending. And I think also, I will say that one of the things that we talk about at Hello Sunshine is that we hope to create conversation with the art that we are making. We hope that people will have conversations. I think there is so much about the book and the show that is so extraordinary, in terms of bringing people together to have conversations, whether it's parents and their teenage children, whether it is moms who are having very different experience of momming, whatever it is, whoever it is that feels compelled to have a conversation. What I think that the end of this season does, and the end of the limited series does, is it allows you to imagine what happens. And then the hope is that you'll engage in conversation about what you think and why you think it and why you felt what you felt. And how did you feel about Elena at the beginning? And how did you feel at the end? And how does that reflect on who you are? Or Mia, did you connect to her at the beginning? Did you connect to her at the end? And what did you, what opened up? Because I think there's real potential for a lot of discovery.
You might have just answered this, but I'm curious for anyone who wants to answer. On the off chance that somebody hasn't seen this show yet, what is the one thing you could say that would make them drop anything and go binge it on Hulu right now?
I'm hesitating because thinking of just one thing is hard. I as the writer, I was just in awe of the entire cast and the performances that they put in. Obviously, Carrie and Reese are the stars, but every single actor, I think, who came on that screen just gave an amazing performance, and especially the kid actors. I feel like if you were ever a teenager, I feel like you will see yourself in them in some way or another. And if that's not sort of enough reason to watch, I feel like all of the conversations that the story starts maybe will be another additional incentive for you.
I would say, I think it's so relevant, and it's relevant in a really digestible way, because it's these, it's like you said, these icon actors that you know and love. And I think it's a story, to all Celeste credit, that just sucks you in. But hopefully what the story does as you watch it, like Lauren and Pilar, we're saying, it is that it makes you see things that you may not have seen before. And the whole theme of the show, I know this isn't a one simple answer, but it's how can you know who you are if you're too afraid to look? That is one of the resounding themes of the show. And I think that we are at a moment right now in our society where we have to look. And I think that this is a story about that done in a way that is accessible to a broad audience. I don't think it's alienating. I think it's inviting. So I would say that.
Very much.
Really fun.
It is. It is.
I was gonna say it's delicious.
Great soundtrack.
It's relevant and delicious.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, then I would urge everyone, if there's anyone who hasn't seen it, go watch it again, because I re-binged the whole thing this weekend. I didn't intend to. It just sort of happened.
I'm gonna watch it. I'm watching it tonight.
And then if you haven't read the book, read the book.
Yeah, yeah. I did it backwards. I read the book backwards. Thank you all so much for being here. I want to thank all of our friends at Hulu. I want to thank you all for talking with us today. And to everyone who's listening to our panel from your couch, your office, or wherever you are right now, thank you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for giving